So first off, I want to thank you all for coming. Apologies that I dragged everyone here on a public holiday, but really appreciate it. I want to start off by saying that we have an amazing panel, and I'm very excited for the conversation that we're going to have over the next hour. I'm just going to do some quick intros. So I'm joined today by, first of all, Ms. Faraj, Senior Advisory Director for Environmental Sustainability at WSP. Many currently leads the WSP Environmental Sustainability team for operations in the Middle East, and she's held several regional roles with management and engineering consultancies, including EY, Arcadis, Hyder, Worley Parsons, DRM, and Veloci Oil. Throughout her career, May was responsible for the management and delivery of massive projects focused on HSE, environmental sustainability studies, ESG reporting, GHG assessments for both regional and international. Thank you for coming, Mike. We're also joined by Mr. Kevin Holliday, Managing Director of Companies Making Change for CED. Kevin has 20 years of experience in strategy, finance, and investment across the globe with broad exposure to different sectors, business models within complex and dynamic environments. Kevin has also held several senior positions with AWS Tamani, OSN, Global Integrated Security, Networkers International, and Euromoney Institutional Investors. He has substantial experience in high-growth, fast-paced, innovative environments and exceptional strengths in strategic development and execution, impact investment, and social entrepreneurship. Thank you for being here, Kevin. And then last but certainly not least, Mr. Ilyaas Essa, Head of Procurement at Colas Middle East and Southeast Asia. Ilyaas is a strategic head of procurement with a record of generating value across regional and global organizations. Acting as a commercial lead within the business, Ilyaas has a track record of finding innovative solutions, embedding systems that significantly reduce spend whilst driving increased value from suppliers, and currently heading the MESEA procurement team for Colas, a multinational infrastructure company. He previously worked across supply chain and procurement functions at Unilever, managing spends and contributing to group procurement vision and strategy, while also managing the digital transformation of the procurement functions. So, thank you, Ilyaas. I suppose I'll start first with May. What does sustainable procurement mean for you and your organization?
So I'll probably start off with what it means to me, basically. And the way I see it is actually, it is a successful integration of environment, social and economic aspects to a wider benefit, and that benefit is specifically driven towards the economy, which drives costs down, but at the same time looks at an improvement in environmental impact and environmental issues. In terms of an organizational level, what it means is that it is a wider integration of those aspects, but really is driven by the materiality of those subjects within an organization. So for instance, if an organization is driven towards an environmental target, then those are effectively implemented within that wider organization with some KPIs and potentially some performance indicators that can be used for a better integration.
Perfect. I'll move on to Kevin. What does it mean to yourself and your organization?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously our job is to build awareness and generate knowledge within the ecosystem on sustainable practices in general. So, having the ability to also understand, how you're sustainably procuring is a fundamental element of being able to harness that knowledge, especially at a startup level. So we obviously create a lot of capacity building at that early stage. So having that ability to be able to understand on the governance front, social and also environmental is really, really key. So for us, it's an important part of bringing together both from an impact, sustainability, and business fundamentals to be able to really understand, where you're procuring from.
Awesome. And yes, I suppose you have the most skin in the game. But what does sustainable procurement mean for you and Colas?
I think before we even go into sustainable procurement, what we need to ask ourselves is, we've gathered here, under the banner of COP28, and this is quite an imperative, social gathering to address climate change. So the question is, what are we as businesses and individuals doing to ultimately shift the needle? But for me, in procurement space, I think the most important thing is that we have collaboration and clear alignment and guidelines, so transparency. And if we have these two, then it becomes a lot more easier to start to address these things.
Amazing. Thank you all for your insightful responses. I'll move on to discuss the topic of sustainable procurement and its alignment with NetZero 2050 here in the UAE. So starting with yourself, Kevin, how important do you think sustainable procurement is as a pillar within like getting to that net zero target? And how do you think it can contribute to these overall goals?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally important, as mentioned, in terms of just being able to align, but also that transparency element. That for me is the key part, to be able to align strategic objectives with the net zero targets that we're all trying to achieve. And just having that collaboration, again, the element to be able to bring that together, but it also depends on governments making incentives or just papers to be able to, or even governments to be able to, align that strategically. And that's all something where I think the ecosystem needs to come together a little bit more in terms of the ecosystem and main players. But overall, ultimately, procurement can play a massive part in towards that net zero target, because there are huge inefficiencies across the current setup that could be easily fixed very quickly. I know there's some large things that we need to do to get there, but there are some very quick wins I know in the short term.
We'll move on to yourself, Ilyaas. Obviously, you're someone that's done this before, that you're someone that's looking to do this now. How important do you think this is the overall targets for net zero 2050?
I think it's extremely imperative that we have sustainable procurement procedures in place in order to achieve the net zero target of the UAE. But at the same time, it's a two-way street. So we would need the buy-in from government, maybe incentives, as Kevin mentioned, to drive the market and the supplier landscape towards this. Because as you would know, majority of your supplier base in the UAE, especially in the construction sector, is quite localized. So you would need to drive it with new procurement policies, similar to Euro green bonds. We need to have those types of incentives in place so that businesses are more driven towards monitoring and reducing the carbon footprint.
I suppose last but not least, Mike, as someone that's kind of developing these strategies for both the public and private sector, how critical is something like this to actually achieving those goals? Because they're quite, I suppose, far away as it stands.
I think the two colleagues here have mentioned a bunch of different aspects, particularly those associated with the mandates from a government level and mandates across different organizations and buy-ins and so on. I would take it probably a level lower and more around organizations and them setting their own internal targets to achieve something sort of that would put them as a ready organization in the coming years before the mandate happens. And with that, what it means is that they would set their own internal targets, let's say for emissions, GHG emissions. What can we do ahead of the game through the implementation of a procurement system that can help us reduce those emissions? And then from there start working backwards and probably working their way through ahead of the game to sort of ensure that we are ready in some shape or form for the mandate to come. The mandate is likely to come. We're seeing a lot of that change happening in the region. However, we need to be ready. And in terms of the benefits and how can organizations contribute, they can contribute on various levels. They can contribute from an emissions perspective, environmental perspective, reducing waste, for example. Reducing your carbon emissions is another way of doing it. Across the whole supply chain, from procuring your materials with less embodied carbon in them, all the way to actually cutting down on waste and waste volumes. And the other way of doing it as well is from actually adopting procurement system strategies that can ensure the reduction of those through the supply of material that is suitable for the target that they set.
So we'll move on now to just challenges, benefits, strategies. Well, my first question is to you, Ilyaas. In terms of implementing this type of program in real life, what are the main challenges that you see that are really blocking the implementation of sustainable procurement practices in the UAE and then potentially in the wider region as well?
I think the key challenge is it's a challenge as well as an opportunity. Is many an organization needs to first conduct a maturity assessment, because if you don't know where you stand today as a baseline, how do you plan where you need to go? So building on to May's response on setting yourself those targets, but one is once you have the target, you need to establish the baseline. And in order to establish the baseline, you also need to understand at what speed you're going to transform your agenda. So baseline is one, and then you need to have a maturity assessment. How geared am I as an organization to start moving towards my goal of achieving net zero? So I think those are the key things that we need to put in place, or the key challenges that we need to start to address and ask ourselves, what steps am I going to take in order to address these challenges? So, and then it goes down to creating the transparency through that end-to-end transformation journey.
How important do you think the role of innovation, or like how important is the role of innovation within the company? It's like with a lot of procurement departments, they've been doing the same thing for the last 15 years. How important is that innovation aspect for procurement departments?
I think innovation is the key driver, especially if you want to achieve something new or something that is ambitious. You cannot continue in the same way that you were always doing things. Say, for example, you have in the road manufacturing industry, you have a high carbon dependency because you're buying petrochemicals. So you need to start looking at ways in which you can innovate, so that in 10 or 20 years, what am I going to do differently in order to pave the same road, or in order to build the same road? How do I change mobility altogether? What are the new types of vehicles that we're looking at? Are we going to have, maybe flying cars? You never know. So these are the types of things that you have to gear yourself towards. So innovation in this sense plays a key role, and I think supplier-led innovation is where we can definitely leverage the experiences of the broader supply network to try to deliver these results.
Awesome. Kevin, moving on to yourself and obviously what the work that C3 does, what are some of the pitfalls that you've noted when it comes to corporates, or what are pitfalls that you think corporates should try and avoid when it comes to implementing sustainability-focused programs, including sustainable procurement strategies?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge across businesses as a whole and corporates in terms of just fragmented approach and not having buy-in from the whole organisation. So you will generally have one or two champions within an organisation pushing the sustainability agenda, and then everything gets shut down because it's either too expensive or it's not the right thing at this point in time for a business to focus on. So then it gets parked for the next year. So it's really trying to drive awareness at the top level to see, actually, sometimes this might not be a natural ROI. There may be other elements like innovation that we know are building for the future, and just changing the mindset and making sure you have that additional buy-in will help significantly. And as we mentioned, the challenge is there, the opportunity is massive. Leveraging new technology, using AI, using Internet of Things to be able to get into these types of making the cost and streamlining approach a little bit more achievable, I think will help significantly. So on the one side, I think the awareness has to be driven, especially with these events, and what we're doing at C3 helps significantly to change the mindset of then bringing people together to see that this is actually, in the long term, a hugely beneficial thing.
And in terms of that, like you mentioned the level of awareness in the market, how have you seen that change over the last few years? Are people more receptive to these ideas? Are people getting to a point where they understand these topics more and understand that they need to have that buy-in, or how is it?
Absolutely. So obviously we've been doing what we do for the last 10 years, and if we roll back, sustainability was not a new concept, but it was around, but it for sure has driven much more of a global awareness. We're nowhere near where we should be, we'll recognise that, but I think in general there is a lot of concept now around what we need to do in terms of collaborative approach to bring it together. So definitely it's changed, still have a lot to go, but the optimism I believe is starting to now see some execution on the low level.
On that execution, this is a question for yourself, Maggie. How can sustainable procurement strategies really help companies reduce their overall carbon footprint and their environmental impact?
There are different ways that this can be looked at, but I'd say one of the key aspects that can be adopted in this space is actually ensuring the right suppliers, and I think this goes back to the discussion that was just raised here, making sure that you have the right suppliers with the right background that can come in and ensure that they bring in the right solutions for you to be able to achieve what you need to achieve potentially. And with those, that would bring you a lot of economic benefit potentially as well in terms of reducing costs, ensuring that the material you bring into play as well is the right material, the right specifications. Another key aspect as well here would be the selection as well of the individuals that would actually be sitting within your procurement department, if that makes sense. Those individuals need to have the right level of awareness around what types of material they should be selecting, what are the benefits of each of those. So you'll see that there is naturally, again, a natural awareness that is introduced through such systems throughout that execution level. So it's not just your software or your solution or your innovation, but it's also the human aspect and the people aspect of those individuals that come in, raise the awareness, ensure that the wider organization understands the value of that. And that's why execution is quite key. You can have your systems, but without the right execution, then that would be useless. And the execution comes through the various levels that we just discussed.
So what we've seen as well recently is a lot of announcements for a lot of big funds, a lot of explosive capital being made available. How can these major economic opportunities that are really coming from this path to net zero benefit businesses that start adopting these sustainable strategies? You've already mentioned cost savings, but how can businesses then leverage this as well?
So the businesses, they obviously need to have, again, the right strategy, the right pathway to put on the table to help the investments come through. So there is no real solution or the clear outcome presented. Investments will not come into play. You have the fund, you have the money, but for you to be able to tap into such funds, you need the right project and the right tool. And this is how it works. So you need to make sure that your pathways are defined. Those pathways towards net zero, can be either environmental, economic, social, the various aspects, and then the benefits presented as well. Once the benefits are presented, that's where the tap-in would come into play. The fund would be interested, or the investor would be interested to go and take the tool or the innovation that comes with it. And again, I'd like to tap into the same point around, at the moment, innovation is more of something that everyone needs to drive towards, but at the same time it needs to be mandated. And potentially this is sort of being ready for the potential mandate around each organization needs to have a certain KPI around innovation, a certain KPI around, let's say, carbon reduction. Such solutions or such pathways would help you achieve that potential target.
I think we'll stick with you, May. You mentioned mandating. We take it up to the regulatory aspect. A major driver for sustainability, sustainable practices in general tends to be the implementation of regulations, mandating, like the use of these practices. So are there any specific legislative or regulatory developments happening now in the Middle East that are really influencing these sustainable procurement practices or really influencing the implementation of these types of programs?
I wouldn't say there are direct mandates as such, but there are indirect ones, in a sense that when you have your net zero 2050 strategy, or when you have your recent policies that are being put in place in terms of from the regulatory perspective, those naturally help the organizations to think around what next and how can I achieve. And is this something that I can achieve through a tool, or is this something that I can achieve through manpower or people and workforce? So it's not a direct relationship. At the moment, there is no direct regulation that says you need to go and sustainably procure, but you have a bunch of different certification that you need to achieve. For example, this tool. An example of those is the green buildings. You have the green building certification. For you to achieve a platinum, let's say LEED, or for you to achieve a gold LEED, you need to have a minimum of certain sustainable procured material that comes into play. So naturally, you're going to start looking as an investor, as an organization, you need to naturally look into how can I actually achieve this quickly? Is it through innovation, or is it through, let's say, people on the ground that actually help me procure? So through those mandates, it's being reinforced, but potentially, again, this is being ready for the bigger picture. We will definitely see something coming down the line around sustainable procurement. Now it's sort of indirectly.
It's things that are pushing you there, but nothing.
The drivers,
Yeah.
exactly.
We'll go to you, Ilyaas. As a procurement leader, how can organizations really ensure that their suppliers adhere to these ethical, sustainable practices in their operations? Because a big part of sustainable procurement tends to be raising the performance of your supply chain. So how can you, as an organization, make sure that they're actually sticking to their word?
I think the first thing that we do, again, it comes down to setting the baseline. So if we understand that we need to have some sort of method to measure the current sustainable practices, and it doesn't. I think we constantly focus on, when we hear sustainability, we tend to focus mainly on carbon emissions, but it goes a lot deeper than that. It goes into employee well-being. It goes into the keeping people governance. Exactly. So in order to do this, you need to have specialist teams to support you. If I look at our organization from a global perspective, we're using a third-party platform which does these sustainability audits to try to establish where are our suppliers at this present moment in time, and then how does that align with our internal goals. The reason, and the other thing is, we select our top-tier suppliers because those would be the most collaborative or the most willing to work towards our goal of achieving a 30% reduction in emissions by 2030. So that would be the first step, establishing a baseline and then starting to lead educational programs for those that fall behind. And for those that are already quite mature, how then do we shift the needle towards achieving even better results?
Kevin, so the same question to you, but from, I suppose, the C3's perspective, as someone that's actively informing, training, educating companies on how to implement these types of programs, how can these organizations then make sure that they're working with partners that they can trust?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think a lot of the part is based on the quality of data that's being produced, either through the system, through a traceability element. We know that goods being procured can be touched, handled thousands of times before they actually enter the right end product. So having the visibility to understand exactly where those points are being taken is a great starting point. We have a company that came through a lot of programs a few years ago. You might know them, Verivax. They are using scan labels to be able to understand where the whole process has been in terms of that product from an end-to-end perspective. It's just giving the consumer a little bit more comfort on understanding where that is as well in terms of their product. But I think going back to the point about how they start, I think it's significant at the beginning. They have a mission to be able to obviously drive this type of practice, because then it's a network effect, right? It starts to then build out where your brand is more sustainable. You can attract better talent, you can retain better talent, and it's all about bringing that ecosystem together to realise that actually there is profit with purpose there in these organisations. And it's across there. It doesn't necessarily happen in procurement, but you also need to be demonstrating you're doing what you're saying, right? A lot of big companies, as we know, there is elements that we know there's a lot more that can be done. So I think just, again, you need to say the transparency point again, but it's massive, it really is, because that builds up credibility, and then it's like, I should be adopting this. And I guess also just one point on that is the factor around building in-country value, shortening supply chains is a massive thing. Just UAE has a big focus on that, specifically on how we can build more procurement in-country. I think that would help significantly.
I'm gonna stick with you here, Kevin. I suppose, in your experience, as you've seen this evolve over the last 10 years, what are the latest trends? What are the latest technologies that you're seeing that are really shaping the space now in the UAE?
There's a lot actually, and it's great to see that this country continues to push the agenda on innovation, and obviously giving startups the foundation to be able to build something when it comes with looking at how you can build a sustainable entity. I think there's a lot of new things popping up, as we know, when it comes to leveraging technology. Again, there is some things that need to be done there to make that a full encompassing solution. But there's some great stuff. I mentioned the traceability angle. There's another company called Seafood Soup. And we know that they focus on the fish industry and where the fish are being bred and then how they get into your plate. I mean, 99% of us understand where our beef is coming from, but do you ever ask where your fish is from? So it's like understanding those elements and really giving some visibility again to the consumer, because the consumer must buy into this. So going back to the technology is a massive enabler across the innovation spectrum. So more and more that we can push to the forefront, I think will be amazing for the ecosystem as a whole.
And then in terms of what you're seeing in terms of measuring and quantifying these social environmental impacts, like how is that being done? You've mentioned traceability. I think there's a big issue in the region when it comes to transparency. I think a lot of companies like to keep things in-house, but the problem with that is that it's very hard then to quantify the good work that's being done as well. So how would you go about then measuring or quantifying these impacts?
Yeah, measuring impact is hard. We spoke about procurement and sustainability, but measuring your impact as an organisation is extremely hard. But I think in the first instance, what we do a lot through our programs is creating a theory of change. How are you impacting your beneficiaries in certain outcomes to make sure that you are aligned in terms of your business objectives to your social aspects as well? So crafting that will then be able to give you a framework to be able to look at how you measure your impact. Is that creating jobs? How many beneficiaries, how many emissions are you reduced? And I would always advocate maybe picking 2 or 3 that are fundamentally the core of your business, but also that you can actually measure them in a precise way. Because again, going back to the issue about how we talk about these types of elements, there's always been manipulation around financial standards from a financial KPI perspective. On the impact side, it's even more fragmented, and subjectivity is even harder. So I think if you're able to demonstrate that you have these key KPIs, will help you substantially.
No, I think it's coming to a point where it's just good business sense, because I think the latest statistic is 66% of MENA consumers are willing to pay more if whatever you do is sustainable or whatever products you source are sustainable. So it's getting to that point.
Yeah.
I'll move on to May. In your opinion, what we see a lot, or what we hear a lot, is just how much impact the supply chain has in general. 11.5 times more carbon emissions than your direct activities, 80 to 90% of your environmental impact. But it'd be good to drill down in terms of what industries have the most to gain from implementing these types of practices and these types of programs.
Again, it's an interesting question you raise over here. And it comes into, I'd say, it's a respective relationship over here. So you have the larger industries, and those industries are your real estate industries, they are your oil and gas industries, they're your heavy industries. And those industries, because of the contribution of impact that they have in the space, the impact that you would see from implementing such systems would be quite large. It would be quite big because obviously they're emitting, let's say, an X amount of emissions, and those emissions are the largest, or they're the biggest contributors globally. So obviously you'll be able to see the impact. But at the same time, you have your smaller organizations that actually are drivers in achieving those reductions and can actually, through small steps that they take, help larger organizations achieve and be part of that direct or indirect relationship, let me say. So you have that layer of large industries, they achieve because they have the most impact through emissions or through waste and so on. But then you have your smaller businesses, your SMEs, the different organizations that can support those and help in reducing that impact. But the key thing is making sure that those are elevated and that relationship is sort of put out there through reporting, for instance, right? And then that's how organizations start to report their impact change. They start to become a bit transparent as well around saying, well, we've used the following SME to help us achieve the following, and so on. So it's really also elevating that relationship to a particular level to show that a combination of those can show the benefit, potentially.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You mentioned like maybe publicizing those different initiatives, but are there any initiatives that you think absolutely are key to the heavy industry, real estate, oil and gas? What are the key initiatives that they would need to do in order to align with the net zero targets of the UAE?
Let's see, one of the key initiatives would be, for example, life cycle assessments that can apply throughout their full procurement chain cycle, potentially. So life cycle assessments will start from the place that you actually source your material all the way to actually releasing or selling and so on that material. And it takes you through the journey of what are the different components of those materials and what is the embodied carbon within those. And this, for instance, having this initiative of ensuring that everything that is being procured goes through a life cycle assessment and follows the EPD, which is the environmental certification that comes with it, ensures that there is an effective, again, outcome. You can measure it. Because this to me is one of the key initiatives that organizations can do. And again, I go back to the point of reporting. They need to report. And reporting is an initiative in itself, because if you don't report your regular improvement on a yearly basis, you won't be able to measure and track it. It will be lost. And then through each of those reporting cycles, you'll be able to identify what were the different things you've done to achieve potential.
Absolutely. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Yes, someone that's implementing this in practice. You mentioned Ilyaas is doing this globally, you're also doing it here. How are you able to find sustainable suppliers, and then how do you monitor them for compliance? So, like I mentioned, a big part of this is obviously reporting and then figuring out where you are and where you're going. But how are you doing that in practice?
I think at the moment, finding sustainable supplies, especially locally, it's a little bit more challenging than we anticipated. However, trying to use the existing suppliers and improve where they are, that's the key focus for us. So currently, the measurement is we started with a global organization to try to track and to monitor our tier 1 suppliers. Obviously, with the majority of them being more local suppliers, it wasn't quite effective as we had imagined. However, now we have a more local offering, which we're testing out to see if that would be the solution. So, trying to be closer to the suppliers, giving them something that they're a bit more familiar with, as well as not charging them for the service of that audit. Because at the moment, I think the maturity level, and I go back to the earlier point, the maturity level of the supplier landscape in the Middle East is not at that level where they would be willing to pay to have themselves audited and to understand where they are from a baseline perspective. So, in order to bridge that gap, we obviously need to have something that's more locally tailored and that's available to them, and a company and an organization that understands the local supply landscape.
I I think that's a big mistake that a lot of different entities make. They come into a region like the Middle East and they don't understand that there is a specific way of doing things, and the behavior change is always the most difficult. So potentially having a local partner that understands that is maybe the best route forward. In terms of trends within that supplier performance, or any or how they're performing based on these assessments, what are you seeing in terms of behavioral changes as a result of this intervention from your side?
I think the first thing is that there were a handful of suppliers that did take us by surprise in terms of their maturity level and where they are in terms of their sustainable journey. And these are very localized or very regional players. Obviously, with the more global entities that we deal with, you tend to have an expectation that yes, they would be meeting these goals. However, I think the large portion of the population is a very, very local supply base, and there we struggle to even get a response from them, and it takes a lot more effort. We need to constantly work on them, go out, meet them, explain why we're doing what we're doing, what would be the ultimate benefit. I think tying this back up to what one of the earlier points was, bringing the visibility and the incentive aspect of the UAE NetZero target, that would have a huge role to play in starting to accelerate the suppliers' behavior.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it definitely, again, going back to that earlier point, you need someone that can speak to them on their level and take them on this journey. Because ultimately, if you're just leaving most of the local suppliers behind, then that's not really in line with the principle of sustainability, because you're literally just shipping everything in. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I suppose I want to end this session on a positive note, and I'm just going to go around the panel asking for practical advice. So, what advice would you give to companies looking to start or enhance their sustainable procurement journey? And I suppose I'll keep with you, Ilyaas, because you're someone that's doing this already. So, what advice would you give these different companies?
I think there's some key points that we all picked on during the session that I could summarize on. Number one, let's set ourselves some goals that are aligned with the global SDG goals, as well as with the regional or with the UAE goals. That's number one. Number two, let's start to conduct a maturity assessment internally, and not only within the organization, but as May said, we also need to do individual maturity assessments to understand, do we have the right people in order to drive that change. And then number three is understanding what is the gap between our baseline and our target, and then we start to map out what's our strategic goals or our roadmap to start to achieve that, or start to close the gap towards the target.
We'll move on to yourself, Mike.
Sure. I'd like to pick on the reporting aspect and the transparency aspect. That to me would be the key takeaway, where organizations need to make sure that they are transparent, they have the right mechanism to report. That mechanism shows the performance based on the targets that they set and the maturity, and then they sort of have a thermometer, and this is how I look at it, a thermometer where they keep measuring the heat point and the heat point of how they are improving. Are they reducing certain things? Do they need to do more of other things? And I think one other key takeaway ties back to people as well, making sure that they train their workforce to understand the systems and the strategies that can help them in achieving the pathways they set. And that could be through the procurement team that they put on board, and that team should be aware of the benefits of sustainability and sustainability within the supply chain. This is quite crucial, because if you have individuals who don't understand the benefits, then they won't be able to make the change. So those to me are two key takeaways that I think organizations should be considering to achieve their targets.
No, absolutely. I think there's also an argument to be made for procurement leads or procurement officers to even be part of the ESG discussion at the corporate level, because obviously they're driving a lot of it through their work. And in general, when a department of yours is spending 30 to 70% of your total revenue, they should probably be part of the conversation. We'll end it with yourself, Kevin. So what practical advice would you give companies going on this journey?
I think that in general, as we've mentioned, it's with any sort of sustainable related activity decision, there is an element of having to make that conscious effort to do it, right? Without the government incentives or mandatory elements to be able to do so. So large corporates will either take the option, the cheapest option or the easiest route, right? So we're relying on them actually having some type of in-between element to be able to encourage corporations to take this sustainable route. And it's an extremely important aspect, as you mentioned, in terms of 78% generally that is going through there. So I think, for me, again, picking up on May's point, the fact that the awareness is key. We've mentioned that. I think also having the buy-in from everyone across the organisation, whether it's related to any sustainable elements, even having recycling bins in an office, there has to be a sustainability-driven strategy. The sustainable procurement part is part of that strategy. And then, there are various different committees to be able to then roll out the best way that is possible. So I think there is an element of both, top-down and bottom-up coming together that then incentivize everyone to get behind this, because we know we have targets to live for.
So thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you for taking the time to come on this very hot day on a national holiday as well. And this was a lovely discussion. And I invite everyone to please stay and have some coffee and snacks. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.